is exciting.
So we're gonna like it.
We're gonna love it.
Or we're excited.
Welcome back to Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. Oh, thank you, David, for adjusting that. This is great. It is Thursday, January 23rd, and we're going to begin today by coming back to a report that we didn't quite finish on a biannual report that we get, the basic needs budget, which also sets the livable wage for Vermont. And so we welcome back Patrick Sheridan to finish up the basic needs budget report. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Patrick Sheridan, Joint Fiscal Office. I took from the discussion we had, was it last week? Some things that it seemed like you were particularly interested in exploring or digging into a little bit more. There was a lot of question about, are we targeting some of the Vermonters that are sort of most prevalent in the state with the report? I we also talked about some of the urban-rural divide and just sort of looking at who lives where. So
sorry, you're beginning with the demographic update and then move to the finishing the basic needs budget.
So what I thought we'd start with is looking at basically what the Technical Advisory Committee looked at in 2023.
Exactly.
So we'll look at that information so you get some context on maybe what some of their thinking was in making some of the decisions about the assumptions. I also heard that there was some interest in looking at some of these budgets side by side, so you can really see how they vary from one family configuration to another. Just makes it easier when they're right next to each other. And then also I pulled some information from part of the appendix of the report that looks at the basic needs budget report methodology, the MIT livable wage calculator, and the EPI calculator. So we'll see that sort of towards the end. So starting with just looking at some of the demographics that the Technical Advisory Committee looked at. I think it's just helpful really quick to go back and look at what some of the assumptions are that we use in the report. So there's 7 family configurations, right, ranging from single person all the way up to 2 adults with 2 kids. And so now the new livable wage, so prior it was 2 adults, no kids. Now it is based on a single adult and shared housing. So that's just sort of the basic starting point. For single households, we assume that the adult is sort of the average cost between a male's budget and a female budget. The data sources we use do differentiate between men and women for things like food budgets. So that was a recent change. We're averaging those two together now rather than having them as 2 distinct separate, previously we just assumed it for female, because you'll see in some of the data that we'll look at in a little bit, for single adult households where there are kids present, it's much more common that that's a female-led household demographically in the state, but that's not always the case, obviously. The 2 adult households, they're assumed to be either married or cohabitating, which has implications on like the number of bedrooms that we assume. And so the new one that we have now, single and shared housing, we're assuming that they're sharing with one other roommate. It's just for simplification when figuring out things like the rental budgets. We assume one child is 4 years old, the other is 6, sort of the distinction there being one is sort of preschool age, the other being in school age, which again has implications on childcare and some food costs. And I'm not sure this one matters a lot, but it's been something we've carried for a long time. The younger child's a boy, the older child is a girl.
Yeah. More empowering that way. Some of us actually had feelings about that one.
Oh, you sort of have, I look at this and I have to tell you, because you probably get kind of skeptic. I just wonder how many folks, in the room fit any of these profiles.
Sorry, I just said the last part.
How many of us in this room fit any of those profiles.
Well, my family growing up was three kids.
Mhm.
You know, currently I live in a 2-adult household with no children.
Mhm.
So I guess I would technically fit in one of them.
But a 2-adult with no children?
That's my household right
Yeah,
now.
well, it's my household too.
But, and you're the demographic we're looking at for the basic needs budget, which is working age families. I mean, working age people, right? We're not looking at retirees.
But
anymore.
here you're looking at, in terms of working age people, you're looking at one working age person in the household, or two in the household, is that right?
One or two. And we have a couple configurations.
Yeah,
with
so
two.
Yeah,
here's the 7 configurations that
Yeah.
we use in the report.
yeah, no, I was just looking at that, and 2 adults with no children, the only option is 2 wage earners.
There's the 2 adults, 2 kids.
Yeah, well, 2 kids
with
and
one
and,
wage earner.
and 2 and 1, but 2 adults with no children, you don't look at one wage earner.
Yeah, and so you bring up a good point. I mean, there's 7 different configurations. There's a million different.
There's a million
scenarios
different
out there.
configurations that apply to what's a living wage for this particular person, and a lot of people are left out.
Right.
Now, in
Right.
terms of a living wage, you know, the one person who is part-time, one who's full-time, the retired person who is, you know, doing this and doing that, who has other sources of income. I mean,
Right, Keisha.
I want to add to Senator Brock's point. First, I want to say, I think there's a useful good news story in here, which is if we compare past basic needs budgets with high childcare costs to current ones, we've taken this list that's daunting for a middle class family, and we took aim at one of the big cost drivers that's more unique to Vermont than the very high cost of childcare. We're looking at the high cost of housing, et cetera. So if we're doing our job with other committees, then this goes down for folks who are trying to build up their middle class stability. And most don't earn this wage. So we're trying to sort of meet that in the middle. So hopefully there's a good news story we can also tell about childcare costs have gone down for the average person in this category. That said, what I want to add to what Senator Brock is saying is 2 adults, 2 children, 1 wage earner supposes 0 childcare costs. Even if I stayed home, I'd like some childcare once in a while, you know, if we want to like do something without the kids. If I have a doctor's appointment, like that's a little bit severe, I think, to say there are 0 childcare costs if one person is like tied to their house. You also could have another adult who's your aging parent or who's disabled. So you could have a lot of other situations where you have an adult in your house who can't bring your childcare budget down to 0.
well, that's the point that I make, is there are innumerable combinations, and what's a living wage for you is not a living wage for me, and vice versa.
That's true. On
That's
the other hand,
true. And so I look at my question, what's the value? I look at this and I say,
think it's huge
with all
value.
those, I don't find it particularly valuable.
well, we had to land on it
Particularly in
because we
terms of the cost. Now, if you produce a budget that allows you to have variable factors so that you can figure out based on where you live, what you do, your family side, a whole bunch of things in which you could say you add this,
and you
and this,
plug them in.
and then you calculate
That
that's one thing. But what we're doing is very rough and I don't find very useful,
well,
particularly for the
I'm
amount
sorry
of
you don't
effort
find
that
it.
it takes to produce it.
I'm sorry you don't find it useful. We work very hard on actually landing on these categories for the working age population. And we based it on what we currently have. I think we improved it a great deal from what we had before. And you're absolutely right. To have a living calculator where you could plug it in would be a great tool. I don't think we have that tool at our
Can I just say, I mean, I this isn't JFO's job, but if people are using a national tool, which I have pointed out,
right.
the family budget
we look at
calculator, if people are using a national tool and it's inaccurate, I would like us to spend our time making that tool accurate, because no person besides us in the country, including in Vermont, is going on our JFO website and finding these documents. They're saying, wow, a baby website just sent me a family budget calculator because we're thinking about moving or taking a job somewhere. I gave the family budget calculator to my parents to look at the average cost of utilities and things in Chittenden County. So if it's inaccurate, I would like us to take the national tools that exist and make sure they're accurate, which we would do with Google Maps and our transportation system, rather than spend a lot of time recreating the wheel. But Patrick, that is no discredit to this great work. I just want the tools that are out there to be accurate
And
in
if
your
the tools that
calculation.
are out there, though, use a brush that is so broad that it still doesn't fit. This tool, for example, in which you say that the basic needs in terms of cost are the same in Burlington as they are in Richford. That's nonsense.
It's by county, and you can put in your household configuration. I
But
don't
in
know.
that county, you take Franklin County and Chittenden County, that is absolutely inaccurate depending
So-
on where you live.
That is why we maintain the rural urban divide. And Patrick, would you be kind enough to speak? And then I know Thomas has a question.
Well, I was going to segue to this. I'm saying
Yeah.
I do find a lot of value in your next 4 slides where
Yeah,
you break out the
exactly.
different household compositions and demographics. So this is great.
Yeah. And Patrick, at some point we did use a lot of the national and data and MIT data. I mean, we used a lot of these tools that we're referring to in this conversation. And so perhaps you'd like
Yeah.
to speak to that.
We're just asked though, where did the data come from on household types?
So we'll look at some of what the technical advisory committee reviewed in terms of whether some of the assumptions of who's living in the households are sort of broadly true across the state, and also if the types that we're using are also sort of broadly applicable to the most amount of houses, knowing the fact that it's not going to apply to every family situation. I mean, I think when I was in here last time, there are a lot of compromises that need to be made within the assumptions, and the goal is always to be making the best, most capturing assumptions. But I will allow the point that it's not perfect.
No, I'm just wondering where the numbers come.
Well, here, we're about to show you where it comes from.
So real quick, I just want to note in the very last appendix of the report, if anyone has it in front of you, the actual, not the slides.
Not these slides, but the basic.
There's a full detailed sort of comparing and contrasting of data sources
Mhm.
between the MIT and the EPI calculator, and sort of
Thank
what
you
some
for
of the
that.
different assumptions
Yeah.
that are used are. And also, this report also details all of the different data sets used in each of the spending categories. As we go through, I can try and list some of those. Maybe when we get to the side-by-side comparisons where we have them all right in front of us,
Okay.
we can go through what some of the different data sources are. So for this demographic stuff that I'm about to show you, all of this is coming from the US Census Bureau. So it'll be either from the Decennial Census, or it'll be from the American Community Survey. It's sort of a standardly used data set for like the best information available on demographics information. So this is just who lives here and what's their like family types. This is not, what I'm about to show you is not necessarily what is factored into the actual dollar amounts associated with each spending category. It's just the people themselves.
Right. Which is where we started with some of deciding what groups we're going to sort of choose.
Question on this slide. Single household. So that means there is a single person there. It's not like a single parent's household would not be part of that. It's just
No,
a single.
it's just a single adult in that.
That's really high. I didn't know there was 31.
No, sorry. That is also going to include the households with kids. I have some other charts later which break that out between those with and without kids. But this is just this first one here is just looking at like number of adults in the household. So almost half are married households in the state. For the 9% of that would be 2 adults who would be considered relationship, which I have them listed here as two separate categories because there are some slight tax implications when you talk about those two different kinds of situations. But really, it's important looking at those two adult households. It matters whether they're considered cohabitating or if they're roommates, because that also has implications on housing assumptions. You know, if you're like we talked about maybe a little last week, if you're a single person living with a roommate, we're going to assume you need 2 bedrooms. If you're cohabitating with a partner, but maybe you're not married, we could maybe make the assumption that you only require 1 bedroom. So, over half the state are either married or cohabitating. This is just the adult population. There are almost a third of the state are single households, and then there's that 13%, which it's not a perfect definition, but you probably consider them as households that are living with roommates. And that's not necessarily the assumption I just listed, where it would be 1 roommate. It could be 2 roommates or 3 roommates. But that's 13% of households in the state. And again, I kind of just pulled all the information the technical advisory committee reviewed when going through the methodology report. So that might be helpful context when looking at this. It's sort of a look inside to what was done.
I think this is helpful to help build some of Senator Brock's concerns. I mean, it's all built on data that's both national and state.
So here we look at the number of households just with children and what those households look like. So in a married makes up almost 70% of all households with children in the state. A further 10% would be a household where the parents living there, or it could be, the 2 custodians of the child or what have you would be cohabitating. So that's almost 80% right there of the state. And households with kids are either 2 adult households who are either married or cohabitating. The remainder are single parent households where there is no spouse or partner present. So that could be a situation where, you have another adult living in the household, but they're not a partner or spouse to the parent or guardian of the children in the household. So that's the remaining 23%.
Which seems a little staggering given how few the declining population of children. I mean, in our school system. So this is kind of counterintuitive.
What it tells you, a lot of kids aren't going to school then.
Or are not yet school age. It's just interesting.
It's just got rid of this. Make a lot of sense.
Doesn't mean it's wrong, Randy. It just means something we need to think about.
So this next slide pertains particularly to those single adult households where there are children present. I mentioned it earlier, the majority of them, over 80%, are led by a female householder. The remainder are male-led households. So historically, I think this is what sort of led to the decision to assume that single adult households were female householders. But I think in the next slide here, you can see that when it's a single living alone, that's not necessarily the case. It's much more of an even split, although still slightly more than half are single female households. So basically, if you look at this, it seemed obvious that the single households with kids present, okay, more often than not, those are female-led households. But when you think about just either the single adult and shared housing or just the single adult, it's a much more even split. So when the committee went through this particular set of information, that was when they made the decision to sort of average the cost for single households between male and female.
That's a question, sure.
Yeah.
So connecting back to some of Senator Hinsdale's points the last time you were before us, Patrick, I'm curious, do you have any context or would you point me to a resource on understanding how Vermont compares regarding the number of households that people are living alone? Not that we want to engineer and motivate certain living styles, but is this 80,000 out of 262,000 out of step with the rest of the nation? I'm just kind of curious how our configurations compare to the rest of the nation.
So I haven't looked at that specifically, but that would not be a problem to get for you, and I can send you that in an
Yeah, it'll
email.
be interesting for all of us to
We
appreciate.
do have the highest highest percentage of households with 2 or fewer people. Almost 70% of our households are 2 or fewer people. That is the highest percentage in the country.
What do you think that is? But maybe this is beyond this discussion here.
Because there's no housing for seniors to move out of.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of twofold. We're a very old state compared to the nation. A lot of those households would be empty nesters essentially. But also we have a declining birth rate. So even some of the younger households are not necessarily, they're maybe having kids later on in life. So they just haven't, moved into the 3-person household bracket, the 4-person household bracket yet. So it's kind of, I think, coming from both angles.
But I do think, to go to Keisha's point, we have a huge, without the churn, because we don't have enough downsizing housing. We have a lot of people, single people in big homes that would like not to be there, but we have no options for them necessarily.
And you're actually teeing up a great narrative that you'll see in the next presentation when we talk just about demographics from Joyce's issue brief this summer.
Right.
There, can I just say, I mean, there are places that have tested that theory and it is true. So like Minneapolis, lots of apartment style housing, lots of buildings that were 10 to 20 units, and they slowed the rate of rent growth. They tackled homelessness, and they got a lot of people who were ready to give up a single family home, which are still pretty popular in a place like Minnesota, to move nearer to their services and free up those single family.
And walking, I mean, in our neck of the woods, we have so many people. And our senior center, as a result, is pushing home share and lots of other options because the cost of moving to another place. And first of all, there aren't any places to move pretty much. And then secondly, the cost is so high. And so trying to manage where they are is, I think, a lot of what we have also enabled and encouraged. But it's, we need the churn. We need to really build housing to support the churn. Patrick, I understand. Keep going.
So the next one, I just want to note that the slides we just looked at were not controlled for income, age, or tenure status, so whether they own or rent. But a specific question came up regarding in the technical advisory committee whether to move the sort of quote unquote official livable wage, the one that's written in statute, from that 2-adult household with no children, where we are assuming that they're either married or cohabitating, to instead a single person in shared housing type household, where again, for this purpose, we would assume that it is a 2-adult household, so 2 roommates living together. There's implications in terms of rent and taxes that go along with that. So one thing we looked at, this is the piece of the analysis for this committee that took the most time and was the most difficult to really narrow in on because it's not sort of readily available outside of the microdata. So the number of 2-adult households in the state that are so 2-adult households that are under $75,000 in wages, and 75,000 was sort of just above where the previous basic needs budget for these types of households was set. So household income of less than 75,000, they're under the age of 65. So because the idea of the report is to target the working age population, right, to remove from the sample those households that are sort of beyond traditional working years. And then there was one other caveat. Oh, they're renters. So the number of married or cohabitating households in the state was a little over 25,000, while the number of 2-adult households where their roommates was about a fifth of that. Now, this is a situation where I know you asked last week, are we targeting the most Vermonters with each category here? By making the livable wage based on the single person in shared housing, I'd say technically you're not capturing the most people, but it was the feeling of the committee that this was sort of philosophically the target demographic. You know, the other thing you can look at here is that the average age in the married or cohabitating household, where there's just 2 adults, no children, that's almost 46 years old. For the 2 roommates, it's like 8 years younger. So it's sort of the younger working age population that the committee felt should be the primary target. If there's anything else, I'd let the chair of that committee speak to it.
No, I think that represents the conversation. Yeah, picture.
I can circulate this, but I wonder if people saw a piece in the Wall Street Journal, like the day after I made my point about, you know, how much we want to promote to people, households and marriage and stability. It basically said people in their 30s are not doing any of those things, and can't afford to, and are really angry about it. So I will circulate that, and I really worry about us using this single person with roommates to say, like, okay, you know, this tells us I don't know what that tells us that we want. We want people to have kids. We want people to be stable. Usually, I mean, society was economically designed for people to be better off when they get married. And that is a huge problem that we have. We're on our way to a lot of crumbling effects. Korea is, Japan is, like, this is an actual problem. And I go back to, you know, some of the costs that would fall to, you know, people as roommates, that if they even tried to become homeowners alone, we would have this problem. You know, so to me, I don't know, it feels like giving up
So
to use that calculation.
I'd just like to respond, because I think that what we want is different than what we are and what is.
But it's a basic need.
And I don't think, I mean, I think we know that policy drives choices. But I think what we're trying to reflect here is what is currently where we are. We may be someplace else in the next 2 years when we do this again, because this is recalculated every 2 years. And I think we can make choices to encourage certain things. I don't particularly want to do social engineering. I have a child who's 35 years old. He's not a child, he's a grown-up. But he is right in the middle of that and has been living along. I mean, that is, and hasn't made those choices because of economic reasons. So, I mean, I think there's a variety of people. I don't think everybody wants to be, I mean, I think we can't assume. I think we have to focus on what data we had and where we are as a state. And
but are you saying he has the privilege to make that choice for economic reasons or not?
Well, if they're even in housing, in some ways, there's economic privilege.
Right.
So I don't think it's economic privilege. Thank you, Ellen.
I'm sorry, for the record, Ellen Kaler, I'm the executive director at the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, and I served on the technical advisory committee and am one of the instigators of the original job gap study and the livable wage analysis with now Auditor Hoffer. And just to point out on this choice, just to support what Patrick is saying, part of the reason that we chose renters versus homeowners was simply for methodological purposes, because to try to find data to calculate home ownership levels of mortgage. How do you determine that at different age ranges, different mortgage rates on a 15-year schedule, on a 30-year schedule? It just becomes a methodological challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And it was easier from a methodological perspective to choose renters, understanding that we want people to be in homeownership because of the wealth building nature that provides. But this overall methodology and these wage levels and these basically budgets are intended to be a reference point. It's not intended to be the be all and end all. It's not intended to be 100% precise. It is intended to be hopefully within a 5 to 10% range of what it costs to live so that employers have a better sense of what it actually costs to live in the state and thus can inform their wages and benefits that they're offering to their employees.
Right, I guess, I mean, I am trying not to dig in, but what we know is that when people hit the point where they are trying to stabilize, they leave the state.
Understood.
Massachusetts is having the same problem. So, I mean, I think what was is not that helpful to what is right now in a way. If the basic needs budget is used by employers to say, hey, like, I'm doing pretty great. This is what I'm paying people. That might not be helpful if the cost of living to go from your wage at that level to a stable person who has the American dream, they're going to another state to get that American dream. So I'm just saying, like, I don't know what we want to use this for, but I remain kind of focused on the huge cost to go from the single person with roommates to the 2-person household and then the
Right.
2-person household with children, because that's who we're losing. And they're going to Texas and Florida and Ohio and leaving the Northeast in huge numbers.
Thanks. I think absolutely want to be addressing that, and I think, and
That's the state's biggest problem.
well, we also have great in-migration, and we have
Of
dating
seniors.
more people than we're losing. Cost and I would add, cost of housing is one of the key challenges that we face. So as they move from renting and being renters in these categories to buying, I mean, huge barriers, cost of housing. So why don't you keep going, Patrick?
Sure. So the next thing that we were going to look at was just some of the assumptions around children, their ages, and how that's changed since the last tech. So previous to the 2023 Technical Advisory Committee, the last one had occurred in 2008. So what the committee looked at to try and confirm was, are the assumptions around children still relevant? So again, if it's one child, it's 4 years old, the preschool age. If it's 2 kids, you have 4 or 6. The older one is of school age. And so this is what the count and share of kids by age looks like between the 2 years that the committees convened. So the 2008 Technical Advisory Committee and one in 2023. You can see right off the bat, 20,000 fewer kids, according to the Census Bureau data, in that 15-year span.
Yeah.
Patrick, coming through with the next
Yeah.
part of the narrative.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I got 3 during that time frame. I'm trying to help.
Hey,
Yeah,
It's
both of you have helped. The right side of the table has been very helpful.
and it's extremely expensive.
Yeah, so I mean, in 2008 there were 100 and sorry, it says 15 to 19 as the top age range. That's just how the census breaks it up.
Do you need some?
But
Those are median.
Oh, yeah.
154,000 down to 134,000 in that time period. So you can see that the share of under 5 years old and then 5 to 9, those are consistently making up about 45% of total kids in the state. Again, I think this assumption has more to do with having, making sure you have the one kid in preschool age and one in school age, because again, that had the implication for childcare and the amount of food and what have you. The committee did talk about, well, my teenage boy eats like a raccoon or a horse or whatever.
I like how they make a lot.
Like a bear,
Raccoons are
getting ready for
right.
hibernation. So that was talked about, but there's sort of, I guess the decision may have come down to there's a long-standing methodology consistency with having these age assumptions. So they didn't end up changing anything to do with that. But again, I think what's interesting here is just looking at the change in the number of kids in the state in that over that 15-year period.
It's stark.
This slide isn't particularly informative, honestly. It just shows you how the the sex composition has changed since then. No, it hasn't really. You know, it's usually 50-50 chance, right? So,
It's amazing. That's the one thing that stayed consistent.
let's see. So there's 63,000 Vermont households with children under the age of 18. There's approximately 115,000 resident children under the age of 18. And that means that the average number of kids in households with kids is about 1.83. Again, Senator Chipman is overachieving.
As always.
His
Three, so.
wife is probably the one overachieving.
I don't know. It's teamwork. I think the one thing we appreciate as parents is it's teamwork.
I was saying better than nothing.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna, Jacob loves your little isms, he does.
So we did look at this particular average number of kids in households with kids just to see, okay, we're assuming 2 kids in most of these households. You know, there is a single adult with 1 kid household that we look at, but, you know, it appears to be appropriate for those 2 adult households to assume that they have 2 kids because we're at 1.83 average kids, which would skew us more towards the 2 kids range. So that was one thing that the committee looked at. So that's the last thing on kids. There wasn't too much there. The next thing they wanted to talk about was the geographic distinction.
Right.
You know, we have the rural, we have the urban. Urban basically just refers to Chittenden County. Rural is the whole rest of the state. Obviously, I know if you go to Richmond, you're not going to feel like you're in an urban environment. If you're in, you know, some of the downtowns of some of Vermont's bigger towns that are not Burlington, you might feel like it's a little more urban. So it's not a perfect distinction. The committee also talked about, you know, the high costs associated with, you know, ski towns and resort towns. So it's not necessarily a perfect distinction, but basic assumption: Chittenden County, urban, rural county, the rest of the state.
Can you turn this to everyone? I mean, I was looking for this kind of chart.
I don't want to derail this.
Yeah, I'd like to share with
Really quick, this is from Tom Cabot's report yesterday, and it's about fertility rates. And I was struck, but this ties into this conversation. If you look at that 27-page report, Vermont's fertility rate is noticeably lower than the rest of the country. And it just made me wonder what's going on in Vermont. So if you look at this from yesterday in finance, this was presented, Vermont's all the way at the top. So
Right.
I don't know, that's, I'm trying to
Is that a
understand.
direct connection with the age demographic?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So the
and a
aging
direct-
and stuff,
a direct connection to the cost of
And
living.
all of the purple is New England.
which is remarkably lower, and I'm trying to overlay that with what I'm doing in these.
So I think it absolutely fits, particularly as we get, not in this report as much, but as we explore costs elsewhere. I mean, it directly relates to the cost of living in this state and the choices people make.
Maple trees. Have to produce the same chart.
Sounds like you're talking about climate change.
Perfect, Maple.
So-
Thank you, Randy, for supporting our work and
And I'll just throw, when we get into the demographics presentation, I'll have a couple more slides about birth rates, we call it the natural change in population, which is really births compared to deaths in the state. So there will be some more information that we can look at on that. So looking at the geographic assumptions, this is just from the US Census Bureau, how many, and I'm looking at the population of Vermonters age 18 and up. And you can see, Chittenden County, the only one that's urban, by far has the most people of any single county in the state, at 137,000. But that's out of 522. So I think the split there is something like 30 to 70%, 30 living in Chittenden being considered our urban population for the purpose of this report. And then the other remainder being our considered rural population. So the committee decided to maintain these distinctions, and actually, instead of having one singular sort of official livable wage, the one that's in statute, broke it out to have 2 distinct ones, one being for the urban folks and the other being for the rural folks.
But is the urban calculation for wages though, is that based on the metropolitan statistical area as opposed to the county?
Yes.
And so parts of Grand Isle County and Franklin County, you know, are included in that total as well as the most rural areas in Chittenden County.
Yeah, and it's not every line item that is divvied up like that. For example, the housing figure is very specific to the Chittenden County area. There's a couple other categories that are very specifically Chittenden County delineated. It's when you get into some other categories. I think like the transportation figures would draw in some of the mileage data, which would include the MSA area, which would include Franklin and Grand Isle. So, like I may have mentioned, you know, we try to be consistent in our data sources, like we use the Consumer Expenditure Survey for a lot, but they are not going to have great information on things like mileage or transportation, which is, you know, when we look at that, what is the data available to us? And it's more so, how do they break it up in a way that closest matches what we're trying to get at? So,
Yeah, and this was a big discussion actually in our committee of the rural or urban, because I argued that I felt that the movement, the natural fluidity between living maybe rurally but working urbanly, that they're really, and that the cost of living in the state is high enough so that it really, I felt we should have one rate, but I mean, dividing that. Tom, you had a question.
I just want to say, this is great. I really appreciate this content, and I hope I'm not using up too much time with questions. But what I will overlay this with what we heard yesterday. My first reaction to the 5 regional districts is just that's too large. And to me, that county that you had broken out there, that makes a lot more sense, because I'm never, I don't know if I'm going to get on board with having people in Richford have to drive to Burlington to talk to their school board representatives. But what I like about this, what you're showing here, I'd love that another column showing the population of 18 and under for each of these counties, because I think that's going to factor into how we start thinking about school district consolidation. And I just want to highlight, as much as Chittenden County is always called out, I worry that Chittenden County with one school district will have a lot less direct representation and oversight compared to the rest of the counties, which are pretty well balanced, where I could see county-based schools district oversight as opposed to the 5. But I don't know if they make any sense with this comment.
well,
I think that's it.
what I could say about that is, rather than relying on Census Bureau information for that, which, you know, it's a survey, so it might not be as perfect. It's possible that Julia might have membership rates that are more exact. It's just a question of, in my mind, I'm trying to think if she can break it out by county or if it's just at the district level.
Membership rates.
Students.
Yeah.
That's true.
So I can certainly get that for you. I just don't know if maybe that would be more appropriate for your purposes.
That would be great. That'd be interesting.
Okay, so this is so 74% of our state is rural and 26 is urban. Again, opted to distinguish between the two for the livable wage that's statute. And that was all of the demographics, and that was sort of the highlights of the demographics information that the committee looked at, and sort of some context on why they made some of the decisions about maintaining certain family compositions and maybe adding the new one and breaking out the local wage, and then some of the other methodological tweaks that were done. So what I have next is something I think that may have been helpful last time I was in, which is just putting those two budgets side by side so you can look at them. So the first one here, I'll just kind of put it up.
So in the dark green is rural. Sorry.
Yeah. So on the left, you have just a single adult household, and on the right, you have single adult shared housing. Maybe I'll give you a minute to just look at that. And if there's any differences that you see in the numbers that you're wondering, hey, why is it like that? I'm happy to be answering the methodological or the assumption answer to that question.
Yeah, sure.
I think I was looking at the next one, but I was just more looking at the categories. So
This one, the 2 adult household, and then
single parent, 1 child, single parent, 2 children.
Okay.
But it's not really about the numbers, it's about the category.
Pretty much it's the same thing.
Okay. Trying to remind myself, utilities are built into housing. Okay,
In rentals, of all of it.
in rentals.
Let's
Okay,
remember what we're looking at as a rental population.
that's helpful just because I mean, we made a decision, right? Like we were about to get heat pumps and then we're like, we're having another child. No heat pumps this year. So, you know, I think it's helpful at some point for us to see who's energy burdened and experiencing energy poverty. Those are numbers we look at by county in different ways. The Northeast Kingdom has the highest energy poverty in the state because they use the most, they have the most utility and fuel needs relative to their income level. So for me, in the future, it would be nice if we broke out energy costs. I know I think it includes transportation in the kingdom. But anyway, I think it's hard to look at housing and utilities wrapped up together and make any policy decisions. Because if we are asking people to pay more for new fuels or join the renewable energy future, they don't even make this much money, let alone, you know, enough to make that leap with us.
Well, maybe some interesting context for you when you're looking at this to just sort of
So
visualize
clarify, which side are we on? We're on single.
one shot, 25.
And I wasn't really looking at the numbers, but yeah.
Well, I think something that might be useful and kind of help
Yeah.
you visualize the type of unit that is being, assessed in this is, so we use the HUD, survey rates.
Mhm.
And what HUD targets is the 40th percentile rental unit. So it's not like your median apartment type. It's also not dilapidated. It might not be the nicest kind of apartment,
Mhm.
but it's also what HUD is targeting in that survey is something that's livable, right?
Mhm.
It's not condemned or something like that. So it's the 40th percentile.
But it's still
In the
specific
market.
to us,
It's still specific. So they do it on the county level.
just like a below average place.
Yeah, it's a below
Okay.
average place.
Okay.
And they do it by county
Mhm.
in Vermont.
Okay, that's helpful. Transportation.
Mhm.
You know, that I circled things where we want to make, I think, policy decisions on, you know, like, is that too much? Is that too little? Do these folks, I mean, 25% of Vermonters don't have reliable transportation. So like, I don't know, what is that? Is this out of reach for a lot of people to have, like, what gets cut from their budget first? So that occurred to me. Dental care, I don't think costs people $24 if they have a child. Like, I think that means they're forgoing care.
So one other important assumption that's used here is we assume employer-based private insurance.
Oh my gosh, for
Yeah.
dental care even?
So yes, dental care and healthcare would be employer-sponsored plans. So that might be, if you're looking at like a public exchange, that might be why the figures look so different.
Do people have dental? Does anyone get dental care? Their employer
Yeah.
doesn't work at UPM?
Yeah, but where is it on the exchange? It's included on the exchange, isn't it? Or there's an additional dental? Yes.
I mean, through the state, I believe state employees have dental, so,
So this is what people are paying out of pocket per month, On average,
actually, let me look up
or
the
it's like an
data.
assumption of what they're paying. This to me looks like people are foregoing dental care.
This is, I believe, based not on this, the assumption is that there is a healthcare benefit, but it's based on what people are spending.
So this is, so Nolan does this calculation for this report. It's based on data from the VH Cures data set, which is a big claims data set.
Okay.
The Green Mountain Board, I think, Green Mountain Board is the steward of the data as written for the report. So it's derived from out of pocket sort of reported costs to people, and he's looking specifically at private employer based plans when he's coming up with it. So it's sort of, this is one that's based on sort of hard Vermont data, sort of averaged out, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Right.
So
It goes to my thing about telecommunications and savings. When I look at those numbers, I guess the policy consideration for me is that that's probably where people are foregoing access to that. And like those we think are basic needs and people should have them. But we would have to greatly subsidize those things for like no one's spending that, that doesn't already have a private dental plan or a good car that they got from their grandparents.
Some people are spending it because that's what it's based on, is what
Right.
people are spending. So it's based on actual costs and actual spend in Vermont.
But if they're not participating in that spending, they're not counted. Right? Do you understand?
Yeah.
If they can't afford telecom, they're not counted. If they can't afford dental care, they're not counted. If they don't have a reliable vehicle, they're not counted.
Right, but we also assume basic understanding of what people would need in telecommunications. How did we base the telecommunications number?
So the telecommunications number, all of that comes from the consumer expenditure survey. We take the figures.
Which is Vermont based.
That particular one is actually nationally based. They do have some Northeast region surveys that they do in addition to the national ones. But basically what that includes is in household operations category, there is a portion of that is for internet access. So we take that,
Right,
put that into the budget. And then there's also a average spending on cellular service. So what you see there is basically for a single person, that's one cell line and internet service, basic internet service at home. And they might not have like an unlimited data plan with that phone, but they have the phone along with the internet service. And that's what goes into that particular calculation. And I guess Senator Brock was interested in some of the specific data sets we use. I talked about a few of them. So food, we're actually using data from USDA. They have different food plans on a national basis that we then are able to scale down to a Vermont specific budget. So, but the starting point is USDA survey data. Merchant housing, I mentioned that's HUD information. Transportation, we use National Highway Transportation Survey.
which is
for
problematic
mileage.
because we're too small for a lot of.
Yeah, there are some problems with that, but we're sort of keep maintaining a consistency with that.
Yeah.
It also includes the IRIS mileage rate. What that includes is fuel, maintenance, and basically like if you're financing a car, it should include the financing costs associated with that. Insurance, thank you. But that's in the operating cost of that, yeah. Healthcare and dental care, like I mentioned, no one pulls that from the data that Vermont Care Board has. Childcare, we actually don't really need the DCF survey data for that anymore because we're assuming the childcare subsidies, the weekly family contributions. I think it's called the family share. Clothing and household expenses, again, that's a community expenditure survey. Personal care products, same. Miscellaneous expenses, that is $5 and it's going to grow by inflation. That was sort of a policy or philosophical decision by the technical advisory committee to set it at that level. I think originally it was set at $1.50
Yeah,
in 1999 and just growing with inflation ever since. So it was sort of
We had much
rebased
discussion
at
about
$5 a day.
Right. It's, I think, way low. And my whole opinion, but there we are. It's where we landed.
Rental insurance and life term insurance, I believe those figures come from national. We have National Life sort of give us some like guidance and rule of thumb information on that. And then savings is just assumed to be 5%. It's always been that amount.
Well, insurance, like a lot of people don't have.
Well, and a lot of people don't say it. I mean, we also, so few people say it. On the other hand, this is this is the data we got for what people in these categories actually are doing.
We have single versus single shared housing. Maybe these can be a little bit more for reference for you all. I am aware of the time and that we're supposed to be looking at demographics as well this morning. So if you're okay with
Well,
maybe
this is
exploring some of these charts.
I just want to point out, this is going to be a heavy data morning because after our break, we have Matt Barowitz. So,
Oh, nice.
and so
Mhm.
it's, our heads are going to be very full at the end of this morning. But I would continue because we have until 10:30 with you.
It's just that the next presentation is a different file, so
Yeah.
I'll open that up. And I think this is the last thing we have. Just a couple of quick notes comparing the MIT calculator and the EPI calculator. They do both offer local wages. They do it by county rather than distinguishing by urban and rural. So just to sort of, we can use the Chittenden County for the urban look at it. We just kind of use Windsor as sort of a proxy. We could, I guess, in theory, use any of the other counties for our rural, but it's sort of the proxy that we use in the report. And there's some differences in what household configurations they will allow. Like EPI does not include a family configuration for a 2-adult household where there's 2 adults with 2 kids with only 1 wage earner. They don't have that included in. That's just not an option, like a toggle option. And then neither of those calculators include an option for a single person in shared housing. They just have single or 2 adult. So this chart here is in the report, and the last appendix of the report. You can see that the 3 calculators, while are vary pretty significantly across certain household types. But, and I think I mentioned this before, if you specifically when you look at some of the households with kids, where we're assuming that Vermont households in this report have access to the child care subsidies. MIT and EPI are making that assumption that they have that. So there's definitely some cost drivers in those calculators that push them a bit higher. But you know, for the most part, I know MIT in particular, they rely very heavily on the consumer expenditure survey for most of their calculations.
Sorry, on which one?
The MIT
The MIT relies on what? I forgot.
consumer expenditure
Right.
survey, which we do use, but they use a bit more heavily. And I guess just for reference, if anyone wants to look, there is a 9 point, there's a 9, numbered 9, there's a list of 9 numbered units on it, telling you that sort of the differences between the methodologies between the 3 reports. But that's sort of a broad overview of that. So with that in mind,
So any other questions
Yeah.
on this and the basic needs budget before we move to the demographic piece?
Just to follow up to Senator Hinsdale's point previously, have we had any of the other national providers ever come in and talk to us about their tools so that that's a way we can create a direct line of communication about what we would like to see more to inform our policy decisions rather than stand up our own calculator? Has that happened in this committee prior?
No,
I wanted to invite in the EPI folks.
we're happy to. I mean, we use JFO and so we
Which-
rely on JFO to do some, to be our lens into that world.
But to Senator Brock's point, if other people are using dynamic calculators to compare counties and states across the country,
There's
we,
huge differences in these numbers.
yeah, we don't have there. I mean, so you think they'll catch up with the childcare number next year?
that's honestly a methodological decision. You know, the report generally assumes that the family configurations we're looking at do not receive public assistance. The way that this report is viewing the child care subsidies is not as public assistance, but rather as a public good. The reason for that being the income thresholds for eligibility for that program are so high. You know, none of these household configurations in this report come even close to not qualifying for those subsidies.
Right. Do we, does everyone count childcare just as a weekday 9 to 5 type of thing? Like no one has a figure on people who pay for childcare that's like babysitting or
Let me just take a quick look here, but my
I thought we
assumption
put-
is
some babysitting and stuff.
Well, it's zero.
Well, there's miscellaneous expenses.
Yeah,
So I mean, I
Oh,
guess that
I
could
think
fall
we
under
included
that
it.
kind
You
of
think it's in
expense.
there?
Well, miscellaneous expenses, I think the definition is spending that doesn't traditionally fall into that other category, so.
And so you combed the, I don't know, consumer data for everything else and put it in there. That's why
For
you got that number.
miscellaneous expenses? No, the committee decided to just base that at $5 a day per adult and then $2.50 a day per
Oh,
child.
that's what you meant when you said.
Yeah, sorry.
I didn't catch that.
So for child.
oh,
MIT
sorry.
relies on various market rate surveys while EPI utilizes state level
okay.
survey provided by the
You just
National
said thank you.
Child Care Resource and Referral Network.
Okay.
That's what they use for those calculations.
Okay.
So maybe it'll change,
Yeah, I would think it.
With, as the program gets, matures.
Yeah.
Right, no, I think that's an area, had we. Yeah,
I just wanna say, and this came up in my mind around the everyone eats conversation before we leave this, that a lot of organizations are putting things out about what most Americans think of as middle class, right? Like, which this gets to in terms of you can pay all of your bills on time without stress. But most people hope and believe that being middle class also includes being able to eat out once in a while and go on one vacation. Those kinds of policy decisions are built in Europe, right? Like the idea that it breaks social isolation and makes people healthier to be able to go out to eat is built into an assumption of what is quality of life and a public good. So no one even makes this much money in Vermont for the most part. But if we really, we're trying to help people be staunchly in the middle class, it's, it really is a way of looking at quality of life to make sure we still think in the back of our minds about how many people can't eat out or take a vacation.
I completely agree with you, and I think one of the benefits of looking at community wealth building is looking at the common goods we need to build on. Childcare is an essential building block of the common good that we need to build on. Many of us feel healthcare would be the same. Many of us, actually, I mean, Europeans also have a significant holiday benefit, which helps mental health. And I mean, there are so many common goods that are built into both the taxation system in Europe and into their whole assumption of their economies. I think we can affect that policy in many ways. We significantly affected it with our childcare policy and our choices. I think it would be, and we could noodle, and we're noodling away at it in big ways. We're not just noodling it in housing. We're making significant investments in shifting housing into a common good rather than, and enabling that. So I think we have to get a sense of that picture and what we could do to enable that, but we also need to be realistic about what we can actually affect. This biennium, I'm happy to explore as much as we can to build our public good and build community wealth. But I think, and so to that end, I think it would be very interesting to hear from EPI. But I also, I want to use our financial filter and trust the work of our incredible joint fiscal office.
I don't trust
you
you all greatly.
but I think it would be very interesting to have EPI come in and testify, and we could figure out what exactly we'd like to have them come and testify about. So maybe we could build on the work that we're hearing about today. And Patrick, you and Nation and I can chat about what it is we'd want to have EPI come and present about, because that could be huge.
May I ask, in terms of the data that we have about these various groups in Vermont and what they're like, was there any survey method, part of the methodology to test what these numbers look like with actual people? and their responses as to, does that fit what they spend?
Um, so, I mean, I think we have the caveat in the report that, you know, this is really meant to be used just as sort of a reference point. It's not a mandate for anything. It's sort of more of
talking
a,
about validation, really what I'm asking for.
I haven't gone out and done, you know.
Does anybody,
market
for
surveys.
example, people who are part of the committee and so on, you know, they have any sources?
We didn't do that. I think you heard some response of our working age twosome over there who are fit, you know, into this world. They're not renters though.
Mhm.
So you know, they aren't, I think we would have to do that. But I think that we could do some of that. You asked, people, constituents, you know, we could ask that as a constituent thing for feedback.
As a data point, I track my budget every year. I summarize all my expenditures and it tracks about what I was spending for 3 kids. So I mean, this isn't far-fetched at all to me. It's fun
Thank you.
spending.
It's pretty good.
I think it's great, and I'm so grateful for this work. And our technical, you know, we could have spent, but you know, there are all sorts of things we could have done more of. But I think, given the update of where we are, this is a big improvement and gives us a much more realistic picture. And as Ellen says, as the originator with Doug, 5 and 10%. I think this gives us a really good, much clearer and more realistic picture of what Vermonters' needs are in this particular category. So, yeah, sorry, Patrick.
Well, I would just say, you know, almost all of the data we use in the report is survey data. So maybe indirectly it is sort of real world validated, although in a way we're also taking 1 million people's responses and just jumbling them up into like sort of one person here.
Yeah.
I realize it's difficult, but you know, I just go back to the old statistical comparison that the average, that if you take a look at the number of people in Vermont who drown in waterways, the average depth of the waterway is 2 feet.
Well,
Right.
people have done that in their bathtub.
Precisely.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I one day would be like, I don't want to get into your personal life, but the healthcare and dental care piece with 3 kids, like, that's amazing. You've young, amazing
Watch out.
as an employer.
So before we get into that, I would, given we have 20 minutes.
Are
I
you
would-
spending that much?
On
that
average, I mean,
health
it's an
insurance
average.
And
I would like to have us turn our attention to Patrick's next proposal, if we could.
Proposal.
Thanks.
I'm not proposing anything.
I didn't say proposal.
Oh, I thought you did, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to. I meant your next presentation.
Yeah, so
What?
I think there's, minus the cover slides, there's maybe 20 slides of content here. I'll try to get through as many as I can. But just know that this link here that you can follow brings you directly to Joyce's issue brief on this topic. She had been writing one sort of periodically throughout the years since she's been with us, but in the last 2 years, she's definitely specifically wanted to do an update each year because what's going on in Vermont after COVID, it's definitely been
It's been very
question.
fluid and it's changed, yeah.
So from 21, so in 2021, Vermont's population actually swelled by almost a little over 4,000 people, which if you look at historical trend lines was the norm. You know, we got a lot of COVID called refugees, I guess.
I like the word swelled.
I mean, if you look at the 2022 number and 23 number right after, 17 in 2022 and 354 in 2023, you know, it was a significant spike in the population since then. And actually 2024, I think I have the number a little further on. We actually did see a slight decrease. I think maybe like Tom Kavett had it in his notes yesterday, and we can look at it when we get to it. But it was a very small decrease. But, you know, it's first time in a long time that the state actually recorded a decrease.
Windsor County keeps going. But just to point
We
out,
lost 136 people according to Tom Cavet's report yesterday. It's a fraction of 0.021%.
So yeah, the population as of 2023 is 647,464 people. And I have just a few bullet points on some of like the biggest movers in age demographic wise. So, you know, we were talking earlier about 4,000 fewer children from 2020 to 2023. Birth rate really declined quite significantly during the pandemic. We actually gained about 2,000 more people in the age range of 25 to 39. So that was kind of a 2% bump in that period. But about 6,100 fewer people ages 55 to 64. These are an important group to consider because they're sort of our later career population. They tend to pay more taxes than almost any other age group. So there are some, state revenue considerations to think about when you're losing that many people in the demographic in that age range. But conversely, so we lost some of the people in those later career people. Those, in typical retirement age ranges, huge increases, almost 11,000 people from the ages of 65 to 79. Part of that is not necessarily just people leaving the state. People age into these age brackets. You'll see a chart later, a big bump of people in that 55 to 64 range today are still rapidly moving into the 65 plus range.
And it's who can afford, to go back to your earlier comment. This is the population with more income, with more assets, and they're the population that's moving into Woodstock. So, for expensive housing status, that's who we are seeing more of moving in. Now, COVID, we saw a lot of younger families move in. We've actually had a growth in our young people's population, in our elementary school population. But the 10,000 people that we're gaining in that population who's buying or can afford to buy some of our houses in our towns, which is a challenge for a bunch of reasons.
To what Patrick was saying, I don't think it can be overstated that 55 to 64 is when you're taking your big income, you're getting your big wealth paybacks, selling your house, your retirement, selling a business. If fewer people do that here because they don't want to be penalized, they have lots of other choices they can make and then bring that wealth to Vermont and buy an expensive house.
And I do want to stress also, I don't want to jump ahead to since we're like jumping around, but you'll see there's this big bubble of people in the state population that are aging into that older range. So it's partially what you're talking about, but also I just want to stress the population is significantly aging out of that age range as well. So
It's aging out of what?
aging out of that age range.
Yeah.
It's the baby boomer population moving
Right.
into the retirement age. And so in addition to that, 65, also significant increases in the 80 plus Vermont category.
Question.
Yeah.
You said Vermont had a real drop in fertility during COVID. Did you have any reason to believe we had more of a drop than other states in the nation, or was that seen across all 50 states?
That's again something I'd have to look at, but I'm happy to send you that.
Yeah.
Well, the data that's used for it does it for every state, so it's easy to pull that.
So that would be great if Patrick could send that, all the things that you just did.
Yeah, so just when kind of teed up when thinking about demographics in Vermont, there's some kind of important things to think about with the way things are trending is your employment. The share of working age Vermonters from age 25 to 64 was about 51%. So 51.3% of the total population in 2020, but by 2023, it dropped to 50.4% of the total population. Now, about 1% might seem like a small number, but over just a 3-year period, it kind of increases the magnitude of that change. And, like I was just talking about, and you were mentioning with those later career Vermonters, it does have a significant impact on tax collections because, income often shifts depending on your age, with younger people relying more so on wages, while the Vermonters receive a higher share of their income from Social Security and retirement income. A lot of that Social Security and retirement income in the state is exempt from taxation. Not all of it, but a good large chunk of it. So there is a difference in sort of we'll call it the amount of your income that is subject to tax. And then there's the important consideration of care for both the young and the underneath. You've got a significant portion of the working age population. So either moving into retirement years and you've got your the younger people, the children to consider. You need that robust working age population to provide the services of both the childcare on that end of the spectrum and the elderly care and other services that older Vermonters rely on the other end of the spectrum. So it's, you know, that 51.3% down to 50.4%, you know, that's the population range that is providing the services on both of the other ends of the age spectrum.
Yeah.
So these are some kind of highlight pieces to get, as you mentioned, in 2024, the population fell by 115% was the number I saw this morning.
250 people.
Yeah, 215 people. So small, but it's the first negative number that they've registered. And so that's from the U.S. Census Bureau. If Tom's number is a little different, he
He
might
says
be doing,
136.
yeah, he might be have some of his own. He does his own population estimates.
Can't trust that guy.
That's not what I said.
Yeah.
So this is kind of reflecting back to pre-pandemic trends is what we're seeing now or the past 2 years. Are we kind of back to, we had the pandemic.
Yeah.
bump. Are we now back to pre-pandemic? Trends.
You know, it's been a really long time. I'm forgetting the exact year since Vermont has actually registered a negative or decline in overall population. But, you know, I think maybe narrative wise, what you might be seeing here is a lot of those people that moved here during the pandemic, you know, maybe they decided to buy a house sight unseen because there was a lot of that happening, come live here for a few years and they realize, oh, I actually miss like all the amenities I had back in Boston because I'm more used to like urban living or close to my family, or maybe their employers even told them, hey, you got to come back to the office 5 days a week now. So that remote work lifestyle is not an option for them. I think there's a lot of things that maybe have changed for, you know, some of the population that moved in. You know, we'll look at some migration data in a little bit, but, you know, I think it's that. And also, again, to kind of come back to this point, birth rate's been really low.
Birth rates low, tax rates have gone up. And as people age, they also move. The number one reason people move is quality of life and to be close to family. So as people age, which we have this huge bump of baby boomers aging, when I ask people, I try and do my own exodus interviews with constituents when I find out they're leaving. A vast majority of them are moving to be closer to their kids. Some of which are here. And
My
some of
parents
which are
moved here, and the
to
only
be closer
place
to
they
their
could
kids.
move from where they could afford a house in Vermont was selling a house in California. I mean, anywhere else, if they tried to sell their house and move here, it just wouldn't work.
That's not really true. Boston area, people still
Okay,
think it's cheaper to come. Well, but we have a lot of people coming from New York and Boston. We have a lot of climate refugees and, you know, lots of people coming here who are coming from much more expensive housing markets and who sadly don't think our prices are as high as they are. Yeah.
What I'm trying to understand, and if you have thoughts of directing me towards this, is our really low fertility rate. How much is that just a function of us being one of the oldest states in the nations and we're just having older people that aren't having kids anymore, or if there's other dynamics factoring into it?
Yeah.
But I don't think that's in this presentation. It's just on my mind that.
Well, I think it's important for us to begin to connect those dots, as Keisha's mentioned. I mean, I think all of us are concerned that costs are driving some of those fertility choices. And it's not just costs we control. When college is $85,000 a year, you're making decisions about whether you're going to have kids. I mean, and you could be more creative about college, but you know, there are some costs that are gobsmacking that people are looking at when they have children.
When our state college costs are among the highest in the nation.
Yeah.
Compared to other states.
Is that unique to Vermont?
But is that, I think Tom's saying, is that unique to Vermont or is that an overall United? And so we're gonna get that.
Yeah, I think it is because of just the costs here of sending your kids to college, for example.
But we're gonna get that data from Patrick because we'll find out that fertility rate run.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think it's necessarily just a U.S. consideration. If you look at, you know,
Yeah, I
developed
agree.
economies worldwide, I know the examples of Japan and Korea were given earlier. If you look at Germany and some of those Western European countries, they also have birth rates that have fallen below the rate of replacement, which is 2.1,
Right.
2.1 per you know, household. I think the US as a whole, I think we're at maybe like 1.7, 1.8 right now nationwide. So, nationwide, it's below the rate of replacement.
Right.
And the reason that the US's population has been growing is via immigration. Without that, the US's population wouldn't be growing right now. But yeah, again, so I think you had the chart up earlier. It's very localized to the Northeast region, right? That is also one of the, I wouldn't be surprised if California is up there too. That's one of the most wealthy regions in the United States. So there's a connection. There could be a connection.
But
People are having kids later in life as well.
but that's also counterintuitive. So here's one of the wealthiest areas in the United States having fewer children.
And when I say
So it's,
And to your point earlier, just for those at home too, I'm not contemplating social engineering attempts to try to address the fertility rate. I'm just trying.
No,
to
they're
understand
economic
what's
engineering.
happening
No, but
behind the
Is what
numbers.
people do.
and it's
Also share
important,
life.
important for us to understand. So we have 7 minutes,
Okay.
so I'd love
Just a
to.
question,
Yeah, right.
and that is, as we look at the gains and losses of population by age group, are there any statistics that show the number of people that we gain by age group who move into Vermont, the number of people by age group who move out of Vermont?
I don't think that the Census Bureau, I believe they do have some information on that. They haven't released the latest one because they release everything in batches basically when they get around to doing the analysis. What I have, which
You shared a bit of that in the population change highlights with more people coming in between 25 and 39 than up.
yeah.
I mean, that you have it by age range a little bit in the slide before, 2 slides before.
Well, but the thing that is within that is also, it's not just migration. It'll include the people aging into and out of that age group.
And that's what I'm trying to differentiate between, we know that we have people who are aging out, for example,
Yeah.
of the prime working years.
Yeah.
Question is, we have people coming into Vermont, is what's happening, because I get a sense very often that it's not just people who are aging out in the prime working years, it's people who are going to Tennessee and someplace else that have lower taxes. Those are the people that I hear a lot of.
Massachusetts and the Boston Globe have been reporting on this a lot because Massachusetts lost like a quarter of its working age population.
Yeah.
So, it also swung toward Trump. It had the second biggest swing toward Trump in the country. So these are the kinds of things we should be thinking about and talking about. Because New England is truly on the precipice.
Yes, it's the reverse side of our trying to recruit and bring people to Vermont is to also trying to keep them. We don't want to leave
Retention
them.
is important.
So, right. So, you're up.
So I'll try and move kind of quickly through.
And we can always have you back.
So I have a sorry.
We have all the time in the world.
Yeah, I always do, right? So next year, just kind of looking at the different generations. So we have the baby boomers, as we've talked about, they're kind of rapidly aging out of that late career stage and into we call it beyond traditional working years because, they don't always necessarily retire at 65. And then also, again, you see a huge dramatic increase percentage wise in that 80+ category. It kind of comes back to the fact that Vermont's the second oldest state in the country. We always have Maine to look at as being older than us. So that was the largest age cohort and more than double the overall population gain of 4,500. So the Gen X population, that was the biggest declining age group over this time period. This is the age group where we saw about 6,100 or more than 6% of people age out of the 55 to 64. So this is the biggest declining group. That age cohort includes both the young baby boomers, which we discussed, and the Gen Xers. They're kind of rapidly moving beyond this age group and into I think we call them sometimes the sunset years.
We gotta get rid of that term.
Okay.
That's me. I'm moving to the sunset years, huh?
Great.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So from 2020 to 23, Vermonters aged 25 to 39 increased by almost 2,000 or almost 2%. You know, it kind of bucks a little bit of the narrative of us losing all of our working age people. And then there's also ages 40 to 54, not quite as big of an increase. That was only 450 people. But as we'll see in a couple seconds, many of these people are likely to be immigrants during the pandemic. You know, if you look at the lagging birth rates, it makes sense that we wouldn't be seeing these large increases in the younger population when we haven't been having a lot of kids. So likely a lot of these people are immigrants. And many would expect that many of these families to move to Vermont with families. However, the number of kids also dropped during that same time period. So that sort of thought process doesn't hold either.
But the number of kids that we were having dropped, but not necessarily the number of kids coming into the state, because actually that age
That
group
could
that
be
came
true.
into the state brought kids with them.
That could be true as well. So Vermont's children on this exact topic, those aged 0 to 4 dropped by about almost 1,700, almost 6%. And births still remain below pre-pandemic levels, even as of 2023. And then again, those aged 5 to 17 fell by about 4,000, or again, 3.4%. So it's not just the youngest kids that we're losing, it's also the school age kids, which, you know, you hear a lot about in education finance discussions about declining school enrollment, right?
Yeah.
So this is the chart I wanted to look at. And of significance, I want to look at this sort of big bubble, this big bulge. This is those sort of young baby boomers, older Gen X population, which are kind of quickly moving out of this late career and into the sort of traditional retirement age. There's a lot of people coming up that are going to be moving into that age range. You know, it really takes a big increase here. Oh, and I should mention the blue line refers to 2020, the green line refers to 2023. So again, you know, we saw there's this spike here among ages of 18 to 24. You know, well, some of that could include college students who aren't necessarily going to stick around. You know, a lot of people do come from out of state to attend Vermont universities, colleges, but don't really stick around.
As a Vermonter, and my parents, my grandparents, and I know many that in that bubble you're talking about, when they get to 63, 65, they move to Florida because just, you know, these winters hurt your face in the morning when it's freezing cold. Like, do you account for that? Is this unexpected, or has there always been a bubble? And do we have a certain amount of anticipated relocation migration to warmer weather as they get older?
Yeah, I mean, so this is just single year of age pulled from the Census Bureau for these 2 years. So within these numbers, there's going to be some migration. Actually, if you don't mind, one thing I think I might like to jump to is these two charts. So this is the first line here. This is the total population event change, and it differentiates by natural change and then net migration. So you see here, natural change is referring to how births compared to deaths. This is from 22 to 23 is the first line here. So, you know, more deaths than births over that time period. But then on the net migration side of things, you can see that, you know, we're pulling in actually a pretty significant number of international immigrants to our state. But, you know, we're also pulling in that year almost 900 out-of-staters who are coming from Massachusetts or wherever. You see that over a slightly larger time horizon, that those numbers actually become larger. So the total population from 2020 to 2023, almost 4,400 overall. But again, the natural change is still decreasing quite a bit. We're actually making up the most of that figure. The positive figure is all coming from in-migration, because our natural population change is actually quite negative over
Yeah.
the time period.
And we can probably kiss the international goodbye.
Well,
Yeah, well, and so here in the 1 year look, you had sort of the international outpacing domestic. and this is probably effective of COVID migration. If you look at the 2020 to 2023 period, which kind of captures the whole pandemic era, domestic actually was accounting for a majority of that. So yes, this doesn't break it out by age. So there might be something within there that you look at and say, oh yeah, 62, 63 going to Florida. But we're still drawing in a significant number of people who want to live here.
It's just been happening for the last 8 years. So like to compare Florida, I'm just kind of curious how much that bubble always fades off.
But as I recall, there used to be a lot of talk, I don't know if the statistics were very good, that a lot of the in-migration were of older people who retired elsewhere, or particularly who had wealth and were less concerned about the income tax rate in Vermont, for example, because they could avoid it.
Right. We have a huge, I think that's reflected in all these numbers is in migration, but
So wealthy people
65,
retire. Wealthy people retire here, working class retire out of here, is what you're saying.
I think that would be very interesting to look at incomes and move. Patrick, could we do that? I mean, I know we need to end and we're beyond time, but is there a way for us to pull up those threads apart a bit in terms of who by income is staying and moving?
I can look into it.
Is
I'm
that
not
possible
sure
with the tax? I know you have a partnership with the tax department on that, some of it. Could we
Let me
explore
talk to
that?
someone in my office because someone may have been working on something that
Okay.
would be useful.
We,
If I look at what they've been working on and I don't think it's useful, I will look into it myself. But I can't promise that the data is going to be available at that level of granularity.
Right. Anything else before we end? Because we can always come back and you'll be back for other things.
So,
But this is really
just last
great
thing, real
for us
quick,
to have it under our belt.
there's some considerations for you that are included in Joyce's issue brief. A lot of it has to do with the implications of an aging workforce and declining birth rates, and some of the economic pressures, and just demographic pressures that can't pause. So just they're at the end of this. I would like to give you a chance, take a look. And there's some other charts in there in the issue briefing. I think you'll find, informative.
Patrick, this is very helpful. Thank you. It's incredibly informative.
I have
Thank you.
to give Joyce credit for writing the issue brief.
Well, we always,
She's
we look forward to, seeing Joyce at some point, but we thank Joyce for this if she's watching. And we thank you for distilling it for this year for Brighton.
I hope Joyce is not watching.
Well,